2 months into ongoing yellow vest protests the French government appears to be moving towards banning unsanctioned protests on the streets. This move is being compared to restrictive protest laws in places like Ukraine. Now, French PM Eduard Philippe presented the new initiative in an effort to curtail violence during these protests, adding that unauthorized protests and wearing face masks would be outlawed. So joining me now to further discuss, former UK MP George Galloway. Hello, George. So talk to me about this. Does the French government have the right to impose such laws in their country?
Well, only the courts could decide that, but it is an extraordinary development. It is effectively a declaration of martial law, and I've just been looking this afternoon, and I can find no other example of a major Western democracy taking such a step since the Second World War, not even France in the famous events of 1968. And, of course, it won't work. You can either have demonstrations or you'll have riots. As I said to a government minister back in 2003, when she tried to keep us out of Hyde Park with our 2 million man and woman march against the Iraq war, you can have a march of 2 million, or you can have a riot all over London of 2 million. Thankfully, sanity prevailed. But that's what will happen in Paris. If they ban demonstrations, there will be a proliferation of riots everywhere, which will be much more difficult to police and control.
And now, George, the French government already has laws on the books, for example, preventing Muslim women from wearing their headscarves, better known as a hijab ban. Mr. Philippe is now extending a similar ban on face masks during protests. How do you view this?
Well, again, it's a draconian step to take. I'm not a fan of face masks, don't get me wrong. Obviously, the potential for miscreants to abuse the covering of their faces is obvious. But when you've got police brutality being meted out, and now the danger of actual criminalization for merely exercising your Western democracy freedom to march and protest, you can see why many of them would want to cover their face. I might even do so myself. But it's all a sign that this president, who only a couple of years ago was the new Napoleon, interfering in the Ukraine, interfering in Syria, fanning flames everywhere else in the world, is now having to take extraordinary measures to extinguish the flames in his own capital.
But now, George, real briefly, on the flip side of this, does freedom of speech, as you say that the demonstrators have by expressing on the streets, does freedom of speech have to hamper the ability of say, non-protesters to enjoy your average Saturday afternoon if these protests keep erupting into violence?
Yeah, but it's one of the prices we pay for living in a democracy, isn't it? That the people must have the right to express themselves. Now, you're lucky you've got a constitution that demands that that right be accepted, endorsed. We don't, here in Britain, as it happens, have any constitution at all. In France, they do have a constitution, a revolutionary one at that. And I'm sure any attempt by Macron to go down this boulevard will end up in the French courts. After all, what happens if Mr. Mélenchon, the leader of the opposition in France, or Marine Le Pen, the right-wing opposition leader in France, what if they call for a demonstration? Is the government really going to forbid that from happening? In which case, how can France any longer be called a democracy? And if it isn't a democracy, of course, it can't be in NATO. You get my drift?
All very good and valid points, as always. George Galloway, thank you so much.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.